I'm excited to share with you some of my own research and some of my own ideas on the trends of contemporary abstract painting. The lecture is composed of sort of separated into certain sections with titles. It's by no means a complete synopsis of the whole contemporary art scene today in abstract painting, but it's some important kind of titles that I've put onto the work that I think is very relevant to my own work as well as work being made today. The first thing that I want to do is start with a series of questions. The first questions are, how do we understand abstract paintings today? What must we know about painting's history in terms of what were the issues or concerns that were present in earlier modernist paintings, abstract expressionism, minimalism, etc.? When we look at an abstract painting, what information is presented, and how do we comprehend the artist's intentions? The content may be found in the title of the painting, the way it was made, the materials and surface, the structure, the mark making, the color palette, or the embedded references. Meaning can be derived from the context in which it is presented or the conditions in which it was made. Meaning a painting could be contingent on the environment that it's shown in, or it could be made as a reaction to something that came before. What is abstraction? In his essay, The Persistence of Abstraction, Bob Nikas asks, is it painting which is abstract, or is it life? And even if there is no recognizable subject, doesn't a painting still have content? And doesn't that have everything to do with an active engagement with painting itself? What I will attempt to address today is that engagement with painting, with its own history, as a material, as a verb. I hope to present the language of abstraction as a viable and compelling means of image making today. The first category that I thought of is called self-referential painting. And what I mean by that is the subject of the painting is the painting. Painting that draws attention to its own objectness or to the painting process. There's seemingly no relationship to outside sources. Kind of quintessential idea of that might be Robert Ryman, a contemporary artist working today, but is late in his career and has been making these white paintings for most of his career. It's white paint on a support that could be canvas, panel, aluminum, but he doesn't think of his paintings as abstract because he doesn't abstract from anything. He's more likely to think of himself as a realist. In his own words, he quotes, I'm quoting his own words, it's involved with real visual aspects of what you were looking at, whether wood, paint, or metal, how it's put together, how it looks on the wall, and how it works with the light. I use real light, so there's not an illusion of light. It's a real experience. The lines are real. You see real shadow. The wall is involved with the painting. There is never any question of what to paint, only how to paint. So what you see is paint on a surface. The artist's buildup of a material, and you're not to look for anything beyond that. You're not to see shapes. You don't want to see it as clouds. It is what it is. And it becomes this kind of meditative act, and you become highly aware of the engagement of looking at light, looking at form, looking at the nuances of the paint. This artist's name is Jo Baer, and these are paintings from the 70s. These paintings are associated with the minimalist art movement. And her work is actually nothing like this now, but I chose these earlier paintings because there's something very interesting about how she asks us now to look at a painting outside of a regular painting space. It's hung low to the ground, hovering like an inch above the ground, and the front of the painting isn't necessarily painted, but the edges are, and it becomes about paying attention to the frame, addressing how one encounters a painting, how one encounters a painting in space. So in order to understand these paintings, you have to walk around them completely, and the painting actually changes as you do that. So new points of perspective come into play, new planes of color, and also the white of the canvas sinks back into the wall. So it starts to refer to its own place. This painting is from 1959. It's Morris Louis painting. And these are from his series called the Veil Paintings. He's associated kind of with an abstract expressionist and color field movement, but unlike the abstract expressionists, these paintings, the kind of personal gestures of action painting were eliminated in favor of these expansive fields of color that emphasize the flatness of the picture plane. The stains, these paintings are actually made with watered down acrylic that soaks into the unprimed canvas. The stains soak into the canvas. The paint and the support were literally inseparable, and it brings forward the inherent flatness of the medium. Contemporary artist making work right now is Toma Apps, A-B-T-S. These paintings are small in scale, about 15 inches by 16 maybe. They're made of simple, basic forms, geometric shapes. What you see is a compilation of her process of working on top of adding new geometric forms to the forms that she started with. The things that you're seeing right here, these are the beginning, the very kind of beginning of the painting. So that's left in the end, and it becomes fully integrated into the final layer. In her own words, Toma Apps says, "I develop something without any preconceptions of what it's going to look like. So to give it a meaning and a sense of self-evidence, I try to define the forms precisely. They become, through shadows, texture, etc., quite physical, therefore real, and not an image of something else. The forms don't stand for anything else. They don't symbolize anything or describe anything outside of the painting. They represent themselves." All these paintings that she makes have an internal logic that's created through the process of painting. You start to see a kind of buildup of the layers underneath that becomes quite physical. But the finished paintings actually feel very locked in and very declarative to me. They're incredibly resolved. This brings on a kind of like thingness to them, especially with the shadows or wholeness, and she makes up proper names for the titles as if they were unique individuals, such as the way you and I would have a name. These paintings have a name. And this is a detail of the painting before, so you can see the texture of the underlying layers. Okay, the next title is called Attitude. But before I go into that, I just want to say that today there isn't a central school of thought that drives abstract painting. Many works function in between abstraction and representation. Artists feel free to reference previous modes of painting while creating an entirely new meaning. Many contemporary painters are uncomfortable with the term abstraction and are reluctant to categorize themselves as abstract painters, even if their paintings are seemingly non-objective, such as Toma Apps and Robert Ryman. This may be due to the artist's feeling that they are unable to separate representation from abstraction, and this brings into question, what is reality? In fact, all paintings are abstract and all represent something. In his essay, Bob Nikas goes on to say, "Is abstraction more real in that it never demands the viewer a suspension of disbelief? And then what does it demand of the viewer? The term abstraction can also reference a kind of reduction or distillation of something real. This reality may or may not be a visual source. In some works that I'll show you today, artists may bring a visual language to a non-visual subject." Okay, going into this subject attitude and what that means. The artist that you're looking at right now is the artist Mary Heilman, and this is a painting from 1973 called Little 9 by 9, which is 9 by 9 inches. It was a reaction to hard-edged geometric abstraction, and she's also influenced by color field painting and minimalism. What's decidedly different about these paintings is the tone. They're playful and casual, and they have, often she includes sort of pop references in the paintings. This painting might just as easily refer to a hard-edged geometric abstraction or a minimalist type of grid, but at the same time it brings up ideas of weaving and fabric. The painting was made by basically laying a red over a blue ground and dragging her finger through the paint to create this grid. The edges were also painted, and it made the painting become more of an object. This painting is called Two-Lane Blacktop, and again, there's this humor in her work that it takes what looks like this very serious hard-edged geometric abstraction, this black ground, and these two white shapes. And then all of a sudden there's a vanishing point in there, and we understand the painting to be an image of two-lane blacktop. So it takes something non-objective and turns it into a recognizable image. So it floats in between abstraction and representation. Simultaneously, Mary is referencing high and low culture or everyday objects. This is an installation of her painting show, and she makes these club chairs, as she calls them, that are derived from Donald Judd's plywood cubes, and they're kind of hybrids of those plus lawn chairs. So you can see the kind of lawn chair back, and again, it takes something that seems like this high art and then merges it with like the lawn chair, and then again, you have the grid in the painting as well as in the lawn chair back. So she takes it, there's a kind of play with art and art history. Her chairs invite the viewer to sit back, relax, and slowly take in the paintings. That sort of casual attitude. Like there's not, she's interested in this idea of, slimming the gap between the separation of art and life. So here's one that's actually part ceramic, part painting. She was trained as a ceramic artist and studied with Peter Volkus, and sort of entered painting after doing those studies. And so she's often using ceramic as a material as well. And what I wanted you to look at in this painting was, again, that the painting becomes this object, but also the casualness of which she applies the tape. Like you can see it's a taped line, but she doesn't care that you can see the painting kind of seeping through under that taped line. We might consider this like purposely bad or sloppy technique, but she's like embracing that sort of casual attitude. So that the green paint kind of seeps under that taped line and becomes part of the attitude of the piece. This is another pop culture reference, and some of you may recognize this as the title is called Lovejoy, and this actually comes out of the Simpsons cartoon as the church stained glass windows, Reverend Lovejoy. And again, here's something where she's dealing with that grid, that very serious grid, and putting in a slight point of perspective. So it becomes a floor, a tile floor. At the same time, it's a very straightforward abstraction. This is the artist Stephen Perino. I put these in because I love this sort of bad attitude. He takes this like kind of fetishistic black gloss, silver paint, sort of brings up associations of leather and motorcycles and nightclubs and this kind of punk attitude. And he literally kind of deconstructs the painting by sort of violating the support. He takes this hard edge, starts with this sort of hard edge geometric abstraction, and then breaks the support. The paintings become sculptural, and they move away from the wall into physical space. So they're bunched up, highly energetic paintings, but also just like very, very declarative. They're brash. When he takes a highly refined surface, a highly refined painting, you can see in this one, if I can point it out here, that is like the edge of where you would stretch a canvas. And so he's like restretching these and making this sort of highly refined painting and crumpling it up and making it into this other form. The next category is called possibilities, and by that I mean just like open-ended situations. I start with the historical figure, de Kooning, an abstract expressionist. And when I look at his paintings, I feel I understand his struggle, and the paintings seem to be under constant revision in a state of unrest. And these paintings could continue on, or they could be declared finished. And I feel like that sort of open quality of them is what's enticing and what makes me sort of get into them and sort of think about his thought process. The artist Tom Niskowski is a contemporary painter. I think a lot of his work might come out of some of that struggle in the studio, but his work is much, much smaller in scale than the abstract, sort of grand gesture of the abstract expressionist. They're quiet. They're about 16 by 20 inches. They're intimate. There's a slow unraveling of time that takes place in these. They don't feel like very immediate to me or urgent. Tom Niskowski, a quote from Tom Niskowski, he says, "I know when a painting's finished when I understand why I wanted to do it in the first place. When it becomes clear, there is this energized space. There is this color. There is something interesting to me. What I like more than anything else about painting, and the thing that makes being in the studio attractive, are all the other things that come into making that image. So there's a kind of excavation of my own memories and my own ideas and my own tastes that I find really exciting and really satisfying." The last show that I saw was during our trip to New York City with the senior painting students. And it was a set of paintings and then a drawing made from one of the finished paintings. So the drawings became were derived after the paintings, or derived from the paintings, as opposed to being made as studies for the paintings. And he says this helps him let go of the paintings, which can sometimes take many years to complete or resolve. So the drawings can sometimes, you might see them as other possible outcomes for the paintings. Here's one of those paintings, and then a drawing based on that painting. Every time he works on a painting, the surface is opened up again. What you see is that day's activity. The history of each day's work is present in the underlying layers, creating a record of that time spent working. This is the artist Katie Moran. Her work is also small in scale, and they often kind of sometimes end up looking like very, I not say representational, but the images seem to be nameable, or it seems like they're paintings of things. Sometimes she starts from an image and extracts elements, but then a lot of times she works very gesturally and then arrives at an image through the process of kind of responding to her previous brushstrokes on the canvas. So rather than setting out to make an image, she arrives at it through indirect way. Sometimes they're landscape, sort of feel like landscape or figurative elements. This one seems like a horse's head. So she searches for the image in the painting process, but they kind of float somewhere, between this sort of unresolved state. Okay, action painting, in quotes. We know Jackson Pollock, right, as the sort of quintessential action painter, the granddaddy of action painting. Pollock appears in his work, and you probably all know his work, so I won't dwell on it, but he does it on the floor. He's standing over the work, drizzling this paint on, pooling it, and it appears to be chaotic, but it's actually highly controlled after he knows how that paint works. It's interesting because he starts on the floor, but then he puts them on the wall. And I think what's interesting about these is that they're not about gravity, but they're about another kind of intense action or slinging, or, it's very obvious that they weren't made on the wall, because then they would be dripping down with gravity. Pia Fries is a contemporary artist who I'm lumping in this action painting category. where I think of her work as like this kind of action painting, like maximized, where she's interested in the properties of paint and the physical image of paint. But what you can see right here in the upper right-hand corner is a silk screen image on the painting surface of a photograph of one of her paint blobs. So you have this kind of actual representation of the paint blob, the actual paint blob, and then the other kind of dripping movements and collision of forces happening in the painting. What this does is it kind of creates a tension between what is represented and what's actual and what's real. When you see these paintings in person, the paint sticks off the canvas like this much. And then sometimes you can't even tell like what's the flat image, that silk screen of the image, and what's real until you get up close to it. It's a detail. This is the artist Bernard Fries, and this is a slide showing how one of his paintings is made with 4 people. He sets up situations or problems and executes them through whatever means required. He doesn't think of the artwork as self-expression, nor does he think that he needs to employ skilled artists to help him create his paintings. He claims his paintings can be made by anyone that he gives the directions to. So he orchestrates the event, and for this series of paintings, that means 4 hands must be working at once to create this piece. These process-based paintings are the record of a painterly method. So he's like very kind of detached from self-expression. Although his paintings are very beautiful, you know. So the surface is a resin surface. The paint dissolves or floats in it. So the physicality of the brushstroke is difficult to see, and these paintings become like really mysterious, which I think makes them like highly seductive works. Fries's art is about painting itself, not about painting as a medium to express feelings or depict fragments of reality. This piece begins with a brush loaded with multiple colors. The brush is dragged around the canvas to fill the frame and ends at the beginning. All the action is there. You can trace how it was made. Here's a detail of installation shot. The artist I'm showing now is Jonathan Lasker. His work comes out of this sort of subconscious doodling, and he takes something very sort of like subconscious, like the doodle, you're just not thinking about it, creates this kind of repetitive form, and then composes those in such a way that they become very conscious, and then he enlarges those. And so it becomes about this very slow recreation of something that was completely automatic. It becomes much more like a graphic reproduction. And they're sort of highly composed. When we see the completed paintings, and then we look at the initial studies, the larger paintings are very clarified and distilled, and beginning with that sort of expressionistic sketch and that sort of automatic movement, he ends up with this kind of very highly composed, almost like still life painting of that simple doodle. Okay, the next category is space. This artist is Katharina Gross, and I think her work is also sort of comes out of abstract expressionism, but her work is also about performance, transformation of an environment, and they're also temporary paintings. They're done with spray paint on the actual walls or ceiling or floor of the structure of the gallery. And this is one of the early pieces, and I think what she does here is sort of reference also color field painting, but the paint sort of negates that corner. Her sort of sweeping, intense colors, they're all supercharged. They're all competing for the same color space. They collide, and it confuses the space. It jars your sense of spatial perception. So the architecture is like moving as you're you're in the painting. You're in an abstract expressionist painting, kind of. Here's an image from the outside, which I really like because it sort of like brings it back to the flatness. And then here's a painting from a structure in Marfa, Texas. I love the sort of relationship of the interior of the building and the painting to the sky, and it sort of brings up that sort of night, dusk, sunset colors. And then inside you have this really radiant glow that takes up the ceiling and the walls. Philip Allen is another painter who's dealing with some really interesting ideas of space, of multiple spaces. He's using multiple points of perspective in his paintings, and he's also dealing with a kind of landscape space. The physical kind of paint blobs that are on the surface, so you can see here they're like built up chunks that bring your attention to the forefront of the painting, to the flat field of the painting, to the painting as object. And then you have this one-point perspective. Oftentimes there's multiple one-point perspectives in the painting. It sucks your eye back in space. And then you have this other sense of perspective with the scale, the diminishing scale. However, the colors don't go in sync with that because the brighter pink colors should be the colors that are in the background. So those are competing with the foreground space. And then you have this kind of burst right here that has shadows and talks of a kind of real meat space. When I look at these paintings, they're small, but I feel like I'm being bombarded. It's like this kind of video game space, or like you're watching TV and like the pop-up windows are coming in, and there's this kind of attention span where I feel like I can't concentrate on the whole painting at once. They're very physical paintings, and I think they're also this kind of pop color, psychedelic realm. Sometimes these letter forms appear. You really have to slow down to get a sense of all the parts. Okay, the next artist is Polly Apfelbaum. This is an installation at the Albright Knox in Buffalo, and you can see that it's paired with a Jackson Pollock painting in the background. Her work is the floor piece, and it's dyed velvet that's been cut out and placed in sections on the floor. She calls these paintings fallen paintings, but they're made with a non-traditional painting material. So they're dyed velvet placed on the floor, but they start to kind of spread out. They look like droplets, growth formations. They ooze around. They could be like mold or viruses. They're not bound by the frame of the rectangle, so they have a more freeform shape, although they're bound by the form of the gallery, so they have to respond to that. Here's a detail. Last piece, okay. And this is another recent piece of hers where you actually have to walk through this to experience it, so you have to be very conscious of the fact that you're not stepping on the painting. You sort of become aware of you interacting with those sections of what look like it could be remnants or cutouts from something. All right, with the time left, I'm just going to talk about my own work a little bit. One of my first and early influences was Joan Mitchell, an abstract expressionist, and her color palette referenced nature. The body movements were present in her painting, and her paintings were strikingly luminous, intense, and fearless. This abstract expressionist movement is something that is really was really influential to my work, and I think secretly sort of still remains important, maybe not so secretly. My work is about painting, but it's also about the sources that I bring to it. Observations of natural elements, ephemeral occurrences, and gravitational forces reveal a world that is constantly in motion, continuously shifting and adapting to changing environmental conditions. I view these moments of discovery as a catalyst for my investigations in painting, finding processes that show the nature of the materials by utilizing the physical properties of paint and paper. My work activates the senses. It's about touch, physical presence, movement, discovery, and transformation. And also a moment caught in time. So I work many times on shaped panels or supports, dimensional surfaces with paper, and also on the rectangle. On this painting, this is actually two sides are bent, so it sort of talks of the speed of the marks colliding and that directional tension that pulls on the edge of the painting as gravity draws it down. So it has a direct, feels like it has a sort of cause and effect. I'm interested in the act of painting, the surface of a painting, the structure of the support, the textures and forms within that, and how these relate to our senses, to our perception of time, weight, gravitational forces, and our environment. I'm also interested in the drip because of that. These paintings that I just showed you are about 5 by 4 feet and are about arm span length. So they're really about this kind of physical, sort of personal space. This is a smaller piece, and it's the previous paintings were oil on panel. These are gouache and watercolor on panel on an absorbent ground. And the gesture is important to me because it deals with a sense of real time. You can understand the flick of a wrist or the sweeping gesture of a whole arm. And with these diptych pieces, I'm kind of interested in pairing seemingly disparate elements together and kind of finding a way to make them function. This painting is called Drift. This again is large. It's oil on panel, around 5 by 4 feet. A diptych. Here's a detail of that, so you can see the different painterly styles that are employed. In my painting process, I pair quick, fluid paint applications with a deliberate, measured sense of adjustment. And so it's important that there is that measured sense of adjustment because I don't want to be caught up in the moment and not making very sort of cognizant decisions. I want to slow down and sort of reveal the interactions and make those interactions important and make maybe one action rely on the other. This painting is called Nestled. It's about 30 inches by 35 inches. It's actually at the Saxon Inn if you want to see it. And so these smaller paintings become much more animated. And they're kind of about these accumulated actions forming intertwined layers in the oil paintings, transforming a single gesture into a complex image. This painting is called Trails. And how I'm making this is I'm taking bent wood and creating shapes out of that, like drawing with the wood. And then I decide on a shape, make the surface, and then use that as a jumping off point for the painting. These ones that are much more animated become about dealing with that edge of the painting and the space around it. So the painting is often determined by how the internal moves with the sort of edge of the painting. This painting is called Fracture. Shimmer. This is Untitled. Here's a good source material. This is an image of a cenote, which is on our trip to the Yucatan. We went to a lot of these, and it's basically a cave with water in it, and then this sort of light filters through and illuminates that water. And I like to sometimes start out with really specific ideas of space or light or color or something might excite me and make me think about that in a formal way. So what I'm trying to do in the painting is to create a new painterly experience from the real physical experience that I had in that place. So all paintings kind of deal with space in one way or another. This painting is called Coast. And then this next source image is of a rainbow in a mist, kind of a misty waterfall. And it made me start to think of like these more fleeting moments, because the oil paintings they take a long time, and they might look spontaneous, but in fact they take sometimes several months to complete. And it's a very slow act. Each move might be quick, but it's actually formulates very slowly and comes to a finishing point very slowly. So I'm trying to look for other speeds and other ways of working. And this idea of this kind of more momentary action made me turn to paper as a medium. And I wanted to use it because it's a flexible support, and it's lightweight, and it has a different kind of quality than the hardwood panel. This was kind of an accident. I did this painting on paper, and then I hated the painting, and then I cut it and decided that it needed to be dimensional, and all of a sudden I realized that I sort of tapped into something that the support and the painting can be very interchangeable. I can work on one and then work on the other and then go back. The paintings on paper physically protrude from the wall, occupying both tangible and perceived space. I use the three-dimensional form to draw attention to the ephemeral elements and material qualities of paper and its ability to drape, bend, and flow, similar to a gestural paint stroke. So these are little actions or gestures, and they're very simple. There's no layering. All the revisions are done on a new piece of paper. So if I don't like it, I just put it in this pile, and then I maybe come back to it later and add something else to it. So they're very fresh. This is called Stack. Here's a detail of that. Palm. This painting was in the recent faculty show, and it's a basic. This is a very simple painting. It's painted first, and then it was a rectangle. I cut it into these points and simply folded it in on itself. So what you see is that rectangle sliced and then folded in. This painting is called Sticky. In all of my paintings, the images aren't preconceived, or the final painting isn't preconceived. They evolve through this balance of this kind of specific source and then this sort of intuitive process, the studio process. And here's some latest work. I'm working on the rectangle again. And these, again, are 5 by 4 feet, like the span of my arm. I'm interested more in these kind of fields lately, where the figure-ground relationships become more difficult to separate, and the layers merge, and the sort of overall action comes out. This painting is called Undertow. This painting is the same size. It's thatch. These are oil on panel. I use panel because I'm constantly sort of changing things as I go, and you can see some of that history in these paintings, but I don't like when paint gets like built up and crusty, because it's sort of not what they're intending to be. Sometimes that history is interesting and it intertwines itself with the final layer, but sometimes it's irrelevant. And so scraping down to the surface of the painting is important for me to maintain that very sort of fresh feeling of the works. And this painting is, again, a work on paper. 3 works on paper put together in these kind of tent formats that it's called Skim. So I made this work on paper first, and then I made this oil painting. And so ideas about kind of going back and forth between the works on paper and the oil paintings, one informs the other. And I think it's making me like a lot more free in the studio and kind of more precise. And there's something very refreshing about that, about being able to kind of go back and forth. This is a gouache on an acrylic on panel. To finish, I'll just say, working with measured intuition, I distill and reveal my observations of an unpredictable and continuously changing environment. I strive to utilize and build on the rich history of abstract painting with a sense of openness and possibility, bringing attention to the places where abstraction is created out of a reflection of physical and internal experiences. And that's it. I'll take questions.